Hi, my name is Ashley Clayton, and this is my communication theory map for Dr. Romo's COM 505 course, Advanced Communication Theory for the fall of 2020. The order of my presentation today is I'm going to start with an explanation of the 7 traditions of communication. We're going to follow that up with an examination of theories that are most relevant in the communication tradition today. And then I'm going to go ahead and end my presentation with my reference that I actually used to create this beautiful presentation that I am presenting to you today. So there are multiple methods actually to organizing the communication theories. Josh Powers used an approach that is known as breaking it up into tiers, while Stanley Dietz actually breaks up the communication into axes and quadrants. But neither one of those really expand on how vast the communication field is and how many theories there actually are. So the most recent one is actually Robert Craig. He used this knowledge of trying to actually get a cohesive understanding of communication across the various disciplines to divide communication theories up into 7 traditions. These traditions are the rhetorical tradition, critical tradition, sociocultural tradition, socio-psychological tradition, cybernetic tradition, phenomenological tradition, and the semiotic tradition. Many of the communication theories that I will be discussing today can overlap into any one of these theories. This is just how I broke it down. And like I mentioned before, this is the most recent way that communication theories have been organized, and it is also the most expansive. We're going to start the presentation today with the rhetorical tradition that actually focuses on speech making. The rhetorical tradition allows scholars to analyze the art of speech making as it consists of constructing arguments and the act of persuasion, which many communication scholars believe is a key component to communication studies. A lot of people also will interchange the word rhetoric with communication to show how similar the two are. At the core of the rhetorical tradition are the invention, arrangement, style, and delivery of speeches. It also dates back to ancient Greece. The theories that I use to separate into the rhetorical tradition were invitational rhetoric, prayer as rhetoric, and theory of animate rhetoric. Invitational rhetoric analyzes discourse between individuals as an invitation to create relationship through understanding. This means if I were to go have a conversation with someone, I would be trying to actually understand them and have them understand me, and it's not meant to be confrontational. Prayer as a rhetoric actually does not focus on direct communication with an individual, but focuses on communication as it pertains to an individual and a heavenly entity, such as God. So when people are utilizing their Bible to pray, or when people are attending church and saying prayer, that is a form of rhetorical communication and would fall under the rhetorical tradition. Next up, we have my personal favorite, sociocultural tradition. So what sociocultural tradition attempts to do is explain how reality is constructed by the various communities that we are in. So if you fall into multiple communities, then your then your being is going to be made up by a, a ton of different interactions that you are having with people. This also discusses how our identity is formed, which ties into what I just mentioned. Language is another important facet of this tradition. So the three theories that I chose to discuss in the sociocultural tradition are cultivation theory, cultural identity theory, and identity negotiation theory. Each one of these theories explains how our interactions and our environments can influence our understanding of the world. For example, cultivation theory can be used to explain how the media creates meanings for individuals that utilize it. An example of this is social media. A large part of the population is on Twitter and Instagram now. And when people are seeing, and as we try to build a collective conscience, and we try to build comfort amongst one another, we tend to start forming our identity around the interactions we're having with people online. Socio-psychological tradition is up next. The socio-psychological tradition focuses on the human mind. According to Littlejohn, this tradition can be divided into 3 parts. These are our behavioral, cognitive, and biological branches. A perfect example of this tradition are, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the next page, the uncertainty reduction theory, expectancy violation, and elaboration likelihood. These theories focus on how people process messages and how it can affect their attitude as well as the message's persuasiveness. For example, with the expectancy violation theory, communication scholars explore how people respond to an unexpected violation of someone's comfort. For example, when you go on Facebook and you search through someone's profile that you haven't met yet for a job interview because you want to check to make sure that the person is someone you want to hire. If the person finds out about this can tie into expectancy violation. They may become extremely uncomfortable and their attitude towards you may change. My next theory I'm going to be discussing is the cybernetic tradition. The cybernetic tradition focuses on the message and the feedback. So how interacting elements of a system influence the systems that are involved in them. 4 major elements of the cybernetic tradition are biological, behavioral, social, and physical. The cybernetic tradition really focuses on how a message is given to a source and how the source receives the message. One of the best ways to actually understand this tradition is to look at it as the childhood game of telephone. As you pass a message from person to person, it can get lost in the feedback along the way. The theories that I use to understand cybernetic tradition and actually put on this map were the materiality of nature theory, actor network, and media dependency theory. These theories showcase how the message within a system functions with the least amount of interference. The next tradition that we're going to be discussing is the one I struggle with saying the most, the phenomenological tradition. This tradition focuses on how people interpret the world they are living in. The main core and the juice of this is interpretation forms our reality as individual. Experiences are subjective and not objective. Furthermore, this theory looks at people as being the most critical factor in understanding how communication studies work. This is because we create our own reality based off of the experiences that we're having. So when people go places or people are interacting with other people, we are able to form our conclusions on what society looks like, what our views are, just based upon those interactions. The theories that I went ahead and discussed in this tradition were co-cultural theory, communication accommodation theory, and face negotiation theory. Each mentioned theory is based on the various interactions that people experience. So with communication accommodation theory, that theory in essence focuses on how people may attempt to accommodate others to build more of a comfortable experience when interacting with them and try and build a friendship or just develop a more open understanding with one another. While on the opposite end of that theory, someone may act in a very unaccommodating way so that a person may no longer interact with them because they have no interest in developing anything further. Lastly, but not least, we have semiotic tradition. The semiotic tradition focuses on signs as being the key to understanding communication. It utilizes symbols to represent objects, feelings, conditions, and more outside of ourself. This theory is also organized into 3 parts: semiotics, pragmatics, and syntactics. The theories that I use to explain this study or this tradition is the Genderlect studies, Revenge of the Crystal, which I think is just such a fun name, and the symbolic interaction theory. With the Genderlect studies, it discusses how men and women communicate differently based off of different factors. Mapping out communication theories into traditions is a very important way to actually help the field of communication be able to discuss the different theories within the within communication across with various scholars. Robert Craig's organization allows for it to be a much simpler process than the methods I mentioned earlier.